A black nurse kicked a 93-year-old decorated soldier in front of 25 bikers. She froze when one biker stepped forward and said, "That's my father." What happened next exposed secrets that would shake an entire corporation. The rumble started 3 miles out. Harold Hawk Miller heard it first, a distant thunder that made the young nurses glance nervously toward the windows of Maple View Nursing Home. But Harold knew that sound. He'd heard engines like that in his youth, roaring across European battlefields on military bikes, carrying messages that meant life or death. Today, they were coming for him. "Mr. Miller, please try to stand straight." Nurse Keisha snapped, adjusting the metal display on the podium for the 3rd time. "The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, and you're making this impossible." Harold gripped the arms of his wheelchair, his 93-year-old hands trembling as he tried to push himself up. His legs, weakened by age and shrapnel wounds from a war most people only read about in history books, barely responded. "I'm trying," he whispered, his voice thin but determined. "Trying isn't good enough." Keisha glanced at the clock, then at Ms. Collins, the nursing home director, who was frantically arranging chairs in the common room. "We have photographers coming. The mayor's office sent someone. This needs to be perfect." Harold managed to stand, swaying slightly. His Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and 3 other medals clinked softly against his chest, pinned there an hour ago by staff who'd never asked about the stories behind them. "There. See?" Harold smiled. That same stubborn smile that had carried him through Normandy, through losing his wife, through 20 years of barely seeing his only son. A soldier can always... His knee buckled. Keisha grabbed his arm, but not gently. "For God's sake, sit down before you fall and ruin everything. I just need a moment. You need to cooperate." Her voice rose sharply. 2 other residents looked up from their afternoon card game, concern crossing their weathered faces. "Do you have any idea how much work went into this? How much press this brings to Mapleview?" Harold sank back into his wheelchair, shame coloring his cheeks. In 70 years, no enemy had made him feel as small as this woman half his age just had. The rumble grew louder, closer. "What is that noise?" Ms. Collins hurried over, her heels clicking anxiously on the linoleum. "Keisha, did you set up the refreshment table?" "Working on the guest of honor," Keisha muttered, adjusting Harold's collar with rough hands. "If he'd just cooperate instead of shaking like a leaf." "I can't help the tremors," Harold said quietly. "I don't care what it is. Stand up one more time. We need to practice the salute for the photos. The bikers are almost here." Someone called from the front desk. "I can see them turning onto Maple Street." Keisha's patience snapped like a dry twig. "Get up now." She moved behind the wheelchair and yanked it backward, causing Harold to lurch forward. "I've dealt with enough stubborn old men today." Harold tried to stand again, but his legs gave out completely. He stumbled, catching himself on the podium. His medals jangled. One fell to the floor with a soft clink. "You're wasting everyone's time." Keisha hissed, and before anyone could react, she kicked the wheelchair away from him. Harold crashed to his knees. The room went dead silent, except for that growing rumble of engines. "Oh my God!" Miss Collins gasped, frozen in place. Harold knelt there, a decorated war hero on the floor, one hand pressed to his chest, breathing hard. His medals, earned in blood and smoke, and watching friends die, lay scattered around him like forgotten promises. "Get up," Keisha said, but her voice had changed. She'd realized her mistake. "Mr. Miller, let me help." The automatic front doors whooshed open. The rumble became a roar, then cut to sudden silence as engines died in the parking lot. Footsteps, heavy boots on tile, not just one pair. Many. Harold looked up from the floor and saw them filing in. 25 men and women in leather vests, faces weathered by wind and sun, patches on their backs reading Steel Patriots MC, American flags sewn onto their sleeves, POWWMIA patches on their chests. And at the front, removing his helmet slowly, stood a man Harold hadn't seen in person for 3 years. Tall, broad-shouldered, gray, streaking his dark beard, and Harold's own eyes staring out from a younger, harder face. "Jake?" Harold whispered. Jake Miller stood in the doorway, his eyes moving from his father on the floor to the scattered medals, to the nurse whose foot was still raised slightly from the kick. The silence stretched impossibly long. Then Jake's voice cut through the room, low and dangerous, each word falling like a stone. "That's my father." Keisha stumbled backward, her face going white. This isn't— He fell. I was trying to— "I saw what you did." Jake's voice never rose, but somehow it filled every corner of the room. Behind him, 24 bikers stood like a wall of leather and steel. Silent witnesses. "We all saw. This is a misunderstanding." Ms. Collins rushed forward, hands up in a placating gesture. "Let's everyone just calm down." "Calm?" A woman biker stepped forward, her gray braid swinging. "That's what you say when someone kicks a 93-year-old veteran?" Jake walked slowly toward his father, his boots echoing in the terrible silence. He knelt down, and for a moment Harold saw the boy Jake used to be. The kid who'd watch him pack his duffel bag for deployment after deployment, face trying so hard not to cry. "Dad," Jake said softly, reaching for Harold's arm. "You okay?" Harold nodded, but his hands shook worse now. Not from age, from the shame of his son seeing him like this, on the floor, helpless. "I'm fine, son. Just a little stumble." "Don't protect her." Jake helped him up with infinite gentleness, then guided him back to the wheelchair. He picked up each medal one by one, handling them like sacred relics. "Not anymore!" He turned to face Keisha, and something in his expression made her take another step back. "You have 10 seconds to explain," Jake said. "Why my father, a man who stormed beaches under machine gun fire, is on the floor while you're standing over him." "It was an accident." Keisha's voice climbed toward hysteria. "He wouldn't cooperate, and you just kicked his wheelchair." The gray-braided woman moved beside Jake, her voice icy. "While he was trying to stand for a ceremony in his honor." "We should call the police," one of the other bikers said. "No." Ms. Collins practically leaped between them. "Please, let's not escalate this. Keisha made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we can handle this internally. There's no need to involve—" "A mistake?" Jake's jaw clenched. "How many mistakes has she made? How many times has she accidentally hurt residents when no one's watching?" The room erupted in murmured denials and nervous exchanges, but Harold, sitting in his wheelchair with his son's hand still on his shoulder, noticed something. Mrs. Dawes, sitting in the corner with her knitting, wouldn't look up. But tears streamed silently down her face. And in that moment, Harold understood. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even close. "Jake," Harold said, his voice stronger now, carrying the command of a soldier who once led men into fire. "Not here. Not like this." Jake looked down at his father, conflict raging across his face. "A soldier doesn't fight scared," Harold continued, meeting his son's eyes. "And he doesn't fight angry. That's when innocents get hurt." The tension held like a drawn bowstring. Finally, Jake nodded, but when he spoke to Miss Collins, his voice promised consequences. "You have until tomorrow morning to make this right. File whatever reports you need to file. Suspend whoever you need to suspend. But if I find out you swept this under the rug—" He looked around at his crew. "We ride through this town every day. We see things. We talk to people. And we remember." He leaned down to whisper something in Harold's ear, then straightened. "Come on, Dad, let's get you some air." As Jake wheeled Harold toward the door, surrounded by a protective wall of bikers, Harold noticed Mrs. Dawes finally look up. Her lips moved silently. "Thank you." Outside in the parking lot, with the sun setting behind the row of motorcycles, Jake knelt beside his father's wheelchair. "I should have come sooner," he said. "Should have checked on you more. You're here now." Harold reached out with a trembling hand and gripped his son's shoulder. "That's what matters. But as the bikers mounted their rides and engines rumbled to life, Jake made a decision. He wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Not until he knew the truth about what happened in Maple View when the cameras weren't rolling. And something told him that what they'd witnessed today was just the beginning. Jake didn't leave. While his crew dispersed to local hotels, he stayed, dragging a chair from the hallway into Harold's small room. The walls were bare except for one photo, Jake's high school graduation, taken 23 years ago. Before the arguments, before the silence. "You don't have to babysit me," Harold said, settling into his bed with a grunt. "I've survived worse than a bad nurse." "That's not the point, Dad." Jake sat down, the chair creaking under his weight. "The point is you shouldn't have to." Harold was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the edge of his Purple Heart medal. "She's not all bad, you know. Last month she stayed late when Mr. Peterson had chest pains." "Dad, I know what you're thinking, but it's complicated here. Some days are good, some days—" He trailed off, staring at the ceiling. "Some days you just want to make it to lights out without being a burden." The word hit Jake like a fist. "You're not a burden. You're a decorated war hero. I'm a 93-year-old man who can't stand without shaking. There's a difference." Harold's voice cracked. "The Army took most of my life, son. My legs, my hearing, my time with you and your mother. What's left isn't worth fighting over." Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You really believe that?" Before Harold could answer, a soft knock interrupted them. The door opened a crack, and Mrs. Dawes peered in, her weathered face anxious. "I'm sorry to bother," she whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. Is it safe?" Jake stood immediately. "Come in, ma'am." She shuffled inside, closing the door behind her. Her hands trembled worse than Harold's. "I wanted to thank you for what you did today. I didn't do anything yet. You did more than anyone else has." Mrs. Dawes sat on the edge of Harold's bed, and Jake noticed bruises on her forearms, yellow and fading, but unmistakable. "She's been here 2 years, Keisha, and she's gotten worse." Harold sat up straighter. "Margaret, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Her voice strengthened. "Harold's been protecting us, telling us not to complain. Says it'll only make things worse. But I'm 87 years old. If not now, when?" Jake pulled out his phone. "Tell me everything." The stories came slowly at first, then faster. Keisha's rough handling during medication time. Meals served cold because residents didn't move fast enough. Missing jewelry, blamed on confusion. And worst of all, the subtle threats. "She said if we complained, we'd be moved to the memory care unit," Mrs. Dawes said, tears streaming. "Where they lock the doors, where nobody visits because families think you're too far gone." "Jesus," Jake muttered. "It's not just her," Mrs. Dawes continued. "Ms. Collins knows. She has to. But this place, it's owned by a big corporation, Silver Care Management. They own 40 facilities across 3 states. Making waves here means risking the whole chain's reputation." Harold's face had gone pale. "Margaret, if they find out you talked—" "Let them find out." She stood, squaring her thin shoulders. "I didn't survive the Depression to be bullied by a woman young enough to be my granddaughter." After she left, Jake paced the small room like a caged animal. "We're going to the police." "And say what?" Harold asked tiredly. "That a nurse was rough with me? They'll call it a misunderstanding. Silver Care has lawyers, son. Good ones. Then we go to the press, with bruises that could be from anything. Stories from old people with no proof." Harold shook his head. "I've seen good men die because of bad strategy. This needs more than rage. It needs a plan." Jake stopped pacing. His father was right. The soldier's mind still sharp even if the body was failing. "Okay, then we build a case. Document everything." "How?" "Tomorrow I come back with my crew. We talk to every resident who will speak to us. We record their stories. We take photos of any injuries. And we find out exactly how deep this goes." Harold studied his son's face. The determination, the anger held in check, the protective instinct that reminded him so much of himself at that age. You'd do that? Take time away from your business, your life. Dad. Jake knelt beside the bed, meeting his father's eyes. You spent your whole life fighting for people you didn't know. Let me fight for the one I do. Harold's throat worked. I wasn't there for you. After your mother died, I didn't know how to be a father and a soldier at the same time. I know. You were 17, and I chose another deployment over staying home. I chose, Dad. Jake's voice cracked. We'll talk about all that, I promise. But right now, let's focus on making sure no one else gets hurt in this place. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of lost years heavy between them. Then Harold smiled, that stubborn smile that had survived decades and wars. Your mother would have liked this version of you. The protector? Jake said quietly. Learned from the best. Down the hall, they heard footsteps, whispered conversations. The night shift changing over, unaware that everything had changed the moment those automatic doors opened. Jake settled back in his chair, phone in hand, already texting his crew. Tomorrow, the real investigation would begin. Tonight, he'd keep watch, because soldiers protected their own, and sons finally learned to fight for their fathers. 3 a.m. came with the sound of crying. Jake jerked awake in his chair, momentarily disoriented. Harold was asleep, snoring softly, but the sound continued, muffled sobs coming from somewhere down the hall. He stood quietly, slipping into the dimly lit corridor. Most doors were closed, nightlights casting yellow pools on the linoleum. The crying was coming from room 114. Jake hesitated. He had no authority here, no right to enter someone's room in the middle of the night. But the sound, raw and terrified, pulled at something deep inside him. He knocked softly. Hello? You okay in there? The crying stopped abruptly. I'm Jake Miller, Harold's son. I heard. The door cracked open. Mrs. Dawes stood there in her nightgown, mascara streaked down her face. She's going to know I talked to you. Who will? Keisha. She always knows. Mrs. Dawes glanced fearfully down the hallway. She came by earlier after lights out. Said she was checking on me, but the way she looked at me, she knows. Jake's jaw tightened. What did she say? Nothing directly. That's how she works. Mrs. Dawes wrung her hands. She adjusted my pillow too hard, made sure I felt how strong she is, then asked if I'd talk to anyone about today's unfortunate accident. That's intimidation. That's survival. Mrs. Dawes's voice dropped to a whisper. You don't understand how it works here. We're trapped. Our families pay for this place, visit twice a month if we're lucky, and trust that we're being cared for. If we complain, we're difficult. If we're difficult, we get sedated. If we're sedated, our families think we're declining. And if they think we're declining, memory care unit, Jake finished grimly. She nodded. Where you lose what little freedom you have left. Your last years become a fog of medication and locked doors. Jake pulled out his phone. Would you be willing to tell me everything on camera? Mrs. Dawes stared at the phone like it was a gun. If I do that, I'll protect you. My whole crew will take shifts. Make sure someone's always here. You can't stay forever. No, Jake admitted. But we can make enough noise that they won't dare touch you. That's how these things work. They operate in silence, so we get loud. Mrs. Dawes was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprising them both, she straightened her spine. My husband was a Marine, Korea. He died protecting people he'd never met. I think he'd be ashamed if I didn't protect myself. She let him in. For the next hour, Jake recorded her testimony. The accidents that left bruises, the medications given late or not at all as punishment, the food withheld from residents who complained, and most damning, the systematic theft of jewelry and cash from those with dementia who couldn't remember what they'd owned in the first place. There's a man down the hall, Mr. Chen, Mrs. Dawes said, her voice steady now. His daughter gave him a jade bracelet, family heirloom worth thousands. It disappeared 3 months ago. He reported it. Ms. Collins said he must have misplaced it, probably threw it away during an episode. But I saw him wear it every single day. He never took it off. Where is it now? I don't know, but I'd bet my Social Security check that Keisha knows. When Jake finally returned to his father's room, Dawn was breaking through the window. Harold was awake, sitting up in bed. "Couldn't sleep either?" Jake asked. "Haven't slept well in 20 years. Harold studied his son's face. "You found something?" "More than something." Jake sat heavily in the chair. "Dad, this place, it's worse than we thought. It's not just one bad nurse. It's a system designed to keep people quiet." Harold nodded slowly. "I know. You knew? Then why?" "Because I'm old, Jake, and tired, and part of me wondered if I deserved it." Harold's voice broke. "I spent decades putting duty over family. Maybe this was just karma." Jake moved to the bed, gripping his father's shoulder. "No, you don't deserve this. None of them do. I wasn't there when your mother got sick," Harold continued, the words he'd held for years finally spilling out. "I was in Afghanistan training local forces and she was dying in a hospital in Ohio. You were 24 handling it alone because your father chose strangers over his own wife. Dad, you called me, begged me to come home, and I said the mission was too important." Tears ran down Harold's weathered face. "I thought I was making the world safe enough for you, but I just made you grow up without a father." Jake's own eyes burned. "You were doing what you thought was right." "Was I? Or was I just running from things I didn't know how to face?" Harold looked at his son, really looked at him. "You became a good man despite me, not because of me. That's not true, isn't it?" Harold smiled sadly. "You're here now fighting for people you barely know. That's not something I taught you. That's something you learned when I wasn't around." The silence stretched between them, filled with 20 years of missed moments. Finally, Jake spoke. "Then let me learn one more thing from you now. How to finish what we start." Harold gripped his son's hand, his tremor steadying for just a moment. Together. Outside, the morning shift arrived. Keisha's car pulled into the parking lot. The war was just beginning. By noon, Jake had 6 bikers stationed throughout Mapleview Nursing Home. They weren't subtle about it. Big Mike sat in the common room reading a newspaper. Sarah and her wife posted up in the cafeteria with coffee that never seemed to empty. 3 others rotated through the hallways, nodding politely at staff, their presence a silent message. "We're watching." Keisha called in sick. "Convenient," Jake muttered to his father as they sat in the activity room. Around them, other residents had slowly gravitated closer, moths to a flame of hope they'd thought was extinguished. Mr. Chen approached first, his jade bracelet story spilling out in broken English. Then Mr. Peterson, whispering about medications that made him sleep 20 hours a day after he'd complained about meal quality. Then others, one by one, each carrying their own small tragedy. Jake recorded everything. "Ms. Collins is having a meltdown," Sarah reported, sliding into a chair beside them. "Saw her on the phone in her office, kept saying corporate and liability. She knows this is bigger than one bad day." "Good," Jake said. "Let her sweat." But Harold looked troubled. "Son, these people, they're scared. If this doesn't work, if nothing changes—" "It'll work." "How can you be sure?" Jake met his father's eyes. "Because I called Laura Chen this morning." Harold's expression shifted. "Laura from Channel 7? She covers Veteran Affairs now. Won a regional Emmy last year for an expose on VA hospital conditions." Jake pulled up a text message. "She's very interested in a story about a decorated World War II veteran being assaulted in a nursing home owned by a major corporation." "Jake, that's strategic," Jake finished. "You taught me that last night. Remember? This isn't just about Keisha. It's about Silver Care Management. 40 facilities. How many other residents are being abused while families trust they're safe?" Mr. Peterson leaned in, his voice shaky but determined. "My daughter pays $8,000 a month for me to be here. $8,000. She works 2 jobs, visits every Sunday, brings my favorite cookies. If she knew what really happens—" "She's going to know," Jake promised. "They all will." Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked it, then looked up sharply. "We've got a problem. Corporate just showed up. 3 suits walking in with Ms. Collins now." Jake stood. Dad, stay here with Sarah. Mike. He caught the big biker's attention across the room. With me, they intercepted the corporate team in the lobby. 2 men and a woman, all in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases that probably cost more than most residents' monthly fees. Gentlemen, the woman said coolly, extending no hand to shake. I'm Victoria Brennan, Regional Director for Silvercare Management. We need to speak privately with Harold Miller's son, Jake interrupted. And anything you need to say about my father, you can say in front of witnesses. Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. Mr. Miller, we take yesterday's incident very seriously. Nurse Keisha has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We're committed to— How many complaints has she had? Jake asked flatly. The question hung in the air. I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel. How many? Jake stepped closer. Behind him, Mike's considerable presence loomed. Because I've spent the morning talking to residents. Turns out Keisha is not the only problem here, but she's been the problem for 2 years. So either you didn't know, which makes you negligent, or you did know, which makes you complicit. One of the men cleared his throat. Mr. Miller, you're understandably upset, but making accusations— I'm not making accusations. I'm stating facts. Jake pulled out his phone, scrolling through his recordings. I have 6 residents on camera describing systematic abuse. I have photos of unexplained bruises. I have documentation of missing property. And I have a journalist very interested in how one of the region's largest elder care corporations handles allegations of abuse. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. You recorded residents without their consent. I recorded residents who gave me their consent because they're terrified of retaliation from your staff. Jake's voice hardened. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to conduct a real investigation, not a cover-up. You're going to interview every resident who wants to speak with a patient advocate present. And you're going to do it before I hand everything I have to Channel 7. Are you threatening us? I'm giving you a choice. Handle this transparently, or watch your corporation become the lead story on every news outlet in the state. The corporate team exchanged glances. Victoria's jaw tightened. We'll need time to coordinate with legal. You have until Monday, Jake interrupted. Today's Thursday. That gives you 4 days to decide if you care more about protecting residents or protecting your stock price. That's unreasonable. So is kicking a 93-year-old war veteran. Jake turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Ms. Brennan. My crew and I will be here every day until this is resolved. Consider us concerned citizens exercising our right to visit a family member. We'll be very visible, very talkative with other families, very interested in hearing their stories. He walked away, leaving the corporate team standing in stunned silence. Mike followed, allowing himself a small grin. Man, you sounded just like your old man back there. That command voice. Jake glanced back at the activity room where Harold sat surrounded by residents who suddenly looked less afraid. Learn from the best, he said quietly. But as they rejoined the group, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back off, or your father won't be the only one who gets hurt. He showed it to Sarah without a word. She looked up, her expression grim. They're scared. That means we're winning. Or it means they're desperate, Jake replied. And desperate people are dangerous. Harold, watching from across the room, saw the exchange, saw his son's jaw set with determination, and remembered what it felt like to go into battle knowing the enemy was willing to fight dirty. The question was, who would blink first? Saturday morning arrived with the roar of 100 engines. The honor ride had been planned for weeks, a tribute escort through downtown, ending at the War Memorial where Harold would receive his medals publicly. But in the 3 days since the incident, word had spread through the veteran community like wildfire. What started as 25 bikers had become a movement. Jake stood in the parking lot of Maple View, watching the endless line of motorcycles roll in. American flags snapped in the wind. Leather vests bore patches from VFW posts across 3 states. Some riders were Vietnam vets with gray beards. Others were young veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. All of them had heard the same story. One of our own was hurt. We ride. This is incredible. Harold breathed, wheeling himself to the window of his room. His voice shook with emotion. "Jake, I never thought—" "You earned it, Dad." Jake adjusted the vintage army jacket he wore. His father's from 1952, still fitting perfectly across his shoulders. "Every single one of them came because they know what you did, what you sacrificed." Ms. Collins appeared in the doorway, her face pale and pinched. "Mr. Miller, the ceremony needs to start soon. The mayor is already here and we have press." "Good," Jake said coldly. "We want press." Outside, news vans from 3 channels had set up. Laura Chen, a sharp-eyed journalist in her 40s, was already interviewing bikers. Jake had sent her everything 2 days ago. The recordings, the photos, the testimonies. She'd verified every detail. Now she was ready to detonate the bomb. The ceremony began at 10 a.m. sharp. A makeshift stage had been erected on the lawn, flanked by flags. Residents in wheelchairs formed the front row, many dressed in their finest clothes. Behind them, hundreds of bikers stood at attention, silent and imposing. The mayor stepped to the microphone first, reading a proclamation about Harold's service. Then came a representative from the Veterans Affairs Office. Then Ms. Collins, her voice overly bright as she praised Mapleview's commitment to honoring our heroes. Jake stood beside his father's wheelchair, hand resting on Harold's shoulder. He could feel the old man trembling, but not from age this time, from anticipation. Finally, the medals were presented. As they draped the ribbons around Harold's neck, cameras flashed. The crowd applauded. It should have been a perfect moment. Jake stepped to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying across the lawn. "My father is a humble man. He'd tell you he was just doing his duty, that he doesn't deserve this attention." Harold looked up sharply, sensing something in his son's tone. "But today isn't just about medals," Jake continued, his voice hardening. "It's about how we treat the men and women who earn them. It's about whether we honor our veterans with ceremonies and photos, then abandon them to abuse behind closed doors." The crowd went still. Ms. Collins started to stand, but Victoria Brennan, seated in the VIP section, grabbed her arm, shaking her head sharply. "Don't make it worse." Jake pulled a small speaker from his pocket, connecting it to his phone. "3 days ago, my father was kicked by a nurse in this facility. I saw it happen. 25 bikers saw it happen. But that's not the real story." He pressed play. Mrs. Dawes's voice filled the air, clear and steady. "She's been here 2 years. Keisha, and she's gotten worse. Rough handling during medication time. Meals served cold as punishment. Missing jewelry from residents with dementia." Then Mr. Chen's voice, broken English, trembling with pain. "My daughter's bracelet. Family treasure gone. They say I lost it. I never lose it, never." Then Mr. Peterson. "Medications that made me sleep 20 hours after I complained." One by one, the testimonies played. 5 residents, their voices overlapping into a chorus of quiet suffering that had been ignored for too long. The press surrounded the stage now, cameras rolling, reporters frantically taking notes. The mayor's face had gone ashen. Victoria Brennan stood abruptly, signaling to her security team, but the bikers moved faster, forming a wall between the corporate team and the exits. Not threatening, just present, impossible to ignore. Laura Chen pushed through to the stage, microphone in hand. "Mr. Miller, are you saying that Silvercare management knew about these allegations?" Jake met the camera directly. "I'm saying that when corporate arrived on Thursday, their first concern was legal liability, not resident safety. I'm saying my father pays $8,000 a month to live here and he's not alone. Multiply that by 40 facilities, and you see exactly what they were protecting." "That's slander!" Victoria shouted. "We have conducted thorough—" "You suspended 1 nurse," Jake interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest. "1. But this isn't about one person. It's about a system that prioritizes profit over people. A system that silences the vulnerable because they're easier to ignore than to protect." Harold reached up, gripping his son's hand. For a moment, Jake thought his father would stop him. Instead, Harold pulled himself to standing, shaking but upright, and took the microphone. "I'm 93 years old," Harold said, his voice thin but steady. I stormed Omaha Beach. I watched friends die. I earned these medals by surviving hell. But I have never felt more helpless than I did on the floor of that nursing home, with a woman half my age standing over me, knowing that if I complained, it would only get worse. The silence was absolute. My son is fighting for me now, Harold continued. But I'm one of millions of elderly Americans in care facilities. How many of them have no one to fight for them? How many suffer in silence because they're afraid, because they're forgotten? He looked directly at the cameras. I don't want justice for just me. I want it for every resident who's been told to stay quiet, every family who trusted their loved ones were safe. Harold sat down heavily, exhausted but resolute. The mayor immediately approached the microphone. I assure you, the city will launch a full investigation. But the damage was done. The story was out. And as the ceremony dissolved into chaos, reporters swarming, corporate lawyers making frantic calls, bikers standing guard around the residents, Jake knew they'd crossed the line. There was no going back now. The news broke that evening like a thunderstorm. Channel 7 led with Laura Chen's investigative report. Decorated veteran alleges systematic abuse at Silver Care Facility. By 9:00 p.m., it had been picked up nationally. By midnight, Zorchug Justice for Harold was trending on social media. Jake sat in his father's room watching the coverage on his phone, while Harold dozed fitfully. Each news cycle brought fresh revelations. Laura hadn't just reported what Jake gave her. She dug deeper. Silvercare management stock dropped 12% in after-hours trading. An anonymous former employee came forward with internal emails showing administrators had ignored multiple abuse complaints to avoid negative publicity. A family in Pennsylvania reported finding bruises on their mother in another Silvercare facility. Bruises that staff claimed were from a fall. The dam had broken. Sunday morning brought unexpected visitors. Jake answered the knock to find 2 police detectives, a grizzled veteran named Morrison and a younger woman named Patel, standing in the hallway. Mr. Miller, we need to speak with your father and other residents. The DA's office has opened a criminal investigation into allegations of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Harold, awake now and surprisingly alert, wheeled himself forward. About time. For the next 3 hours, detectives moved through Maple View, taking formal statements. Mrs. Dawes spoke first, her voice steady now that official protection had arrived. Then Mr. Chen, Mr. Peterson, and 6 others Jake hadn't even known were victims. The pattern became clear. Keisha had targeted the most vulnerable, those with dementia, those without frequent visitors, those too scared to fight back. But she hadn't worked alone. Ms. Collins knew, Detective Patel told Jake quietly as they stood in the hallway. We found her emails. She received at least 4 formal complaints about Keisha over 18 months. Each time she conducted a verbal counseling and filed nothing in writing. No paper trail means no liability. She was protecting the company, Jake said bitterly. She was protecting her job. Silvercare has a policy. Facilities with formal abuse complaints get flagged for corporate review. Directors at flagged facilities don't get bonuses. Patel's jaw tightened. She chose money over safety. By noon, 2 police cars pulled up to Maple View. Jake watched from Harold's window as Detective Morrison walked Ms. Collins out in handcuffs. She wasn't crying. Her face was blank, shocked, as if she couldn't believe this was happening to her. The residents watched, too. Some from windows, others from the common room. Mrs. Dawes stood at the glass door, one hand pressed to her heart. She's really gone, she whispered. Harold wheeled up beside her. Justice served without a shot fired, but the reckoning wasn't finished. Monday brought federal investigators. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced surprise inspections of all 40 Silvercare facilities nationwide. What they found made the news coverage explode exponentially. Understaffing at dangerous levels, expired medication still being administered, records falsified to pass state inspections, and at a facility in Missouri, security footage of another nurse striking a resident, footage that had been lost during an internal investigation. Tuesday, Silvercare's CEO resigned. The company's stock was in freefall. Wednesday, families began filing lawsuits, first dozens, then hundreds. Jake's phone rang constantly with attorneys asking him to be a witness, advocates asking him to speak at rallies, families thanking him for giving them the courage to speak up. Through it all, Harold grew quieter. "You okay, Dad?" Jake asked Wednesday evening. They sat in the room that had become their headquarters, takeout containers littering the small table. "I keep thinking about Keisha," Harold said slowly. "What about her?" "She was raised by her grandmother. I heard her mention it once. The grandmother died in a nursing home. Neglected, Keisha said. Bed sores. Alone." Harold stared at his hands. "I wonder if that's why she became a nurse, to be better. And somewhere along the way, she became exactly what she hated." Jake frowned. "You're not sympathizing with her. I'm understanding her. There's a difference." Harold looked at his son. Hurt people hurt people. That doesn't excuse what she did. But maybe if someone had helped her deal with her anger, her trauma, none of this happens." "That's pretty generous, Dad." "No, it's just old." Harold smiled sadly. "When you've lived as long as I have, you realize most evil isn't pure. It's broken people breaking others. The system failed Keisha too, just in a different way." Jake absorbed this, reminded again that his father's wisdom ran deeper than battlefield tactics. Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the incident, Keisha was arrested. Jake wasn't there to see it. He was with Harold at a doctor's appointment. But Sarah texted him a photo. Keisha being led to a police car, her face buried in her hands, reporters shouting questions she wouldn't answer. 3 counts of elder abuse, 2 counts of theft, 1 count of witness intimidation. Harold looked at the photo for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes. "I hope she gets help," he said quietly. "In prison, I hope someone helps her." That night, as Jake prepared to finally head to a hotel for the first night since this began, Harold stopped him. "Thank you, son, for fighting when I couldn't." "You fought for decades, Dad. My turn." Harold gripped Jake's hand with surprising strength. "I wasted so many years. Years I could have spent with you, with your mother. I kept thinking there was more time. There's never more time." Something in his voice made Jake's chest tighten. "Dad, I'm tired," Jake said. "Really tired." Harold smiled. But it was the smile of a soldier who'd finally reached the end of a long march. "But I'm not scared anymore. Because you're here. Because we fixed this together." Jake stayed that night after all. Some instinct told him his father needed him close. He didn't know how right he was. Harold's health declined rapidly over the next 2 weeks. The doctors called it failure to thrive, a clinical term for what Jake understood as his father finally letting go. For years, Harold had held on through sheer stubbornness, through duty, through the soldier's creed of never surrendering. But now, with his mission complete and his son by his side, he was ready. "It's not the abuse," Dr. Whitmore explained gently in the hospital room where Harold had been transferred. "His heart is simply worn out. 93 years, 2 wars, a lifetime of carrying weight most men never know. He's earned his rest." Jake sat beside the bed, holding his father's hand. Harold drifted in and out of consciousness now, each waking moment shorter than the last. During one lucid period, Harold's eyes opened clear and focused. "The residents," he whispered. "Are they safe?" "They are, Dad. Silvercare's losing their license. The state's taking over management until a new company can be vetted. Mrs. Dawes sends her love. She says you're her hero." Harold's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Wrong. You're the hero. I just finally asked for help." "Took you long enough?" Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "Took me seeing you fight." Harold's grip tightened weakly. "All those years I thought being strong meant facing everything alone. But watching you bring those bikers, call that reporter, protect those people, you taught me strength is knowing when to let others stand with you. Dad, let me... I'm proud of you." Harold's breathing labored. "Not for today. For who you became without me. For building a family with those bikers when your blood family failed you." Tears streamed down Jake's face. "You didn't fail me." "I did, but maybe you succeeded anyway." Harold's eyes drifted closed. "That's enough. That's more than enough. He slept then and didn't wake for 3 days. On the 4th day, Jake arrived to find his father's room filled with visitors. Mrs. Dawes sat by the window, knitting quietly. Mr. Chen stood by the door, his recovered jade bracelet, found in Keisha's apartment during the arrest, clutched in his hands. Mr. Peterson and 5 other residents from Maple View crowded the small space. "We wanted to say goodbye," Mrs. Dawes said softly. "Is that okay?" Jake nodded, unable to speak. One by one, they approached Harold's bedside. Each touched his hand, whispered their thanks, shared how his courage had given them courage. Harold didn't wake, but Jake swore he could see peace settling over his father's face like a benediction. That evening, as sunset painted the hospital window gold and orange, Harold's breathing changed. Jake knew the sound. He'd heard it before, overseas, watching wounded soldiers slip away despite every effort to save them. The death rattle, medics called it, the body's final surrender. "Dad," Jake whispered, leaning close, "if you need to go, it's okay. I'll be fine. We all will." Harold's eyes fluttered open one last time. His lips moved. Jake pressed his ear close. "Proud of my son." Then silence. Not peaceful, not dramatic. Just the simple cessation of breath. Harold Hawk Miller, soldier, father, hero, was gone. Jake sat there for a long time, his father's hand still warm in his own, tears falling onto the thin hospital blanket. A nurse entered quietly. "Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry for your—" She stopped, seeing something on the bedside table. "Did you see this?" It was an envelope addressed in Harold's shaky handwriting, Jake's name on the front. Inside, a letter written weeks ago, before the ceremony, before everything. "Jake, if you're reading this, I'm gone." "Good. I've been tired for longer than you know. I was never good with words when it mattered. So let me say now what I should have said 1,000 times. I'm sorry. Sorry for choosing duty over you. Sorry for not being there when your mother died. Sorry for letting you grow up thinking you weren't enough to make me stay. You were always enough, more than enough. I was just too broken to see it. But I see it now. You became exactly the man I hoped you'd be. Strong enough to fight, but wise enough to fight for the right things. You don't fight because you hate what's in front of you. You fight because you love what's behind you. That's what a real soldier does. And son, you're the best soldier I know. A soldier fights for his country. A son fights for his father's honor. You did both. Don't mourn me long. Take that bike and ride, live loud, love hard, protect the weak. That's the legacy that matters. Your mother's waiting for me. I can feel it. We'll be watching over you. Proud as hell. Go make some noise, son. Dad." Jake folded the letter carefully, his hands shaking. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a single text to his crew. "He's gone. We ride at dawn." The response was immediate. Dozens of messages, all saying the same thing. "We'll be there." That night, Jake didn't sleep. He sat in his father's hospital room until the funeral home came. He rode his bike through empty streets until sunrise. And he planned the ride Harold deserved. Not a funeral procession, not a somber parade. A thundering celebration, a warrior's send-off. The honor ride eternal. Saturday arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, warm sun, a gentle breeze that carried the scent of autumn leaves. 200 motorcycles lined up outside Henderson Funeral Home. More kept arriving. Veterans in dress uniforms. Gold Star families holding flags. Residents from Maple View in a specially arranged bus. Mrs. Dawes at the front wearing Harold's favorite color, purple for his Purple Heart. Jake stood beside the hearse, his father's casket visible through the glass, draped in an American flag. Laura Chen approached with her cameraman. "Jake, can we—" "Yeah," he said simply. "Dad would want the story finished." She interviewed him there in his leather vest with his father's army jacket underneath. Tears unashamed on his face. "What would you want people to remember about Harold Miller?" Laura asked. Jake looked at the sea of bikes, the crowd still gathering, the flags snapping in the wind. "That he fought 2 wars, Jake said. One with guns overseas, one with truth at home, and he won them both." The procession began at 10 Guans a.m. They rode slowly through town, engines rumbling like thunder. a river of chrome and leather, and American flags flowing through the streets. People lined the sidewalks. Families, veterans, strangers who'd heard the story. They saluted. They waved flags. They cried. The route took them past Mapleview, where residents stood outside with staff, all of them saluting. Past the War Memorial, where Harold received his final medals. Past the high school where Jake had graduated alone because his father was deployed. Finally to the cemetery where Harold's wife, Jake's mother, waited. As they lowered the casket, 25 bikers formed an honor guard. Jake stood at attention, the folded flag heavy in his arms. Taps played. Guns fired a 21-gun salute. And then, as 200 motorcycles revved their engines, a thunderous goodbye that echoed across the cemetery and beyond. Jake knelt at the grave, placing the flag beside his mother's headstone. "We did it, Dad!" 6 months later, Jake stood in front of a building that used to be Mapleview Nursing Home. The sign above the door was new, gleaming in the spring sunshine. The Miller Veteran Center. Behind him, a crowd gathered. Veterans, families, residents, reporters. Mrs. Dawes sat in the front row, her knitting needles still, but her smile bright. Mr. Chen stood beside her, his jade bracelet catching the light. Laura Chen positioned her camera crew for the dedication ceremony. The building had been transformed. After Silver Care declared bankruptcy under the weight of lawsuits and criminal charges, a coalition of veteran organizations, private donors, and state funding had purchased the property. Jake had overseen every renovation. Gone were the institutional hallways and cold linoleum. In their place, warm wood floors, spacious common areas, a garden where residents could grow vegetables, and a garage bay where mechanically inclined veterans could work on motorcycles with visiting bikers. But the real changes were invisible, written into policy, trained into staff, embedded in the culture. "We open today with a promise," Jake said into the microphone, his voice steady. "Every resident here will be treated with dignity. Every complaint will be heard. Every family will have 24/7 access. And every staff member will understand that caring for our veterans isn't a job. It's an honor." He unveiled a bronze plaque beside the entrance. It bore his father's photo in uniform, young and proud, and an inscription. Harold Hawk Miller, 1932, 2025. For those who fought, and for those who never stopped fighting for them. Applause erupted. Jake stepped back, his eyes burning with tears he no longer tried to hide. After the ceremony, he walked through the facility with Mrs. Dawes, who had chosen to stay despite offers from other homes. "Your father would be so proud," she said, squeezing his arm. "Not just of the building, of you. I couldn't have done it without all of you speaking up, and we couldn't have done it without you listening." She stopped at a window overlooking the garden, where residents in wheelchairs chatted with young veterans who volunteered as companions. "You know what the real miracle is? Not that you saved us. It's that you taught us we were worth saving." Jake swallowed hard. "You always were. Maybe, but we'd forgotten." She patted his hand. "Don't ever stop reminding people, Jake. There are other Mapleviews out there, other Keishas, other families who don't know their loved ones are suffering." "I know," Jake said quietly. "I'm working on it." And he was. The Miller Veteran Center was just the beginning. Jake had stepped back from his construction business to focus on advocacy full-time. He consulted with state legislators on elder care reform. He trained families to recognize signs of abuse. He rode to nursing homes across 3 states, just visiting, just watching, just making sure the vulnerable weren't invisible. The Steel Patriots had grown too. Now over 300 members, all committed to veteran welfare. They called themselves Harold's Army, and they showed up everywhere. At VA hospitals, at care facilities, at hearings where policy was made. One afternoon, Jake visited his parents' grave. Fresh flowers from Mrs. Dawes adorned both headstones. He sat on the grass between them, the way he used to sit between them on the couch as a child. Before deployments and distance changed everything. "Hey, Mom, hey, Dad." He pulled out his father's letter, worn soft now from being read hundreds of times. "I've been thinking about what you wrote, Dad, about fighting because you love what's behind you." A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. "I get it now. You weren't just fighting for America. You were fighting for the world you wanted me to inherit. And I'm not just fighting for residents in nursing homes. I'm fighting for the world where people like you, people who gave everything, are cherished, not discarded." He traced the engraving on Harold's headstone. "I used to be so angry that you chose duty over family. But now I understand. Duty was family to you. Every soldier you trained, every mission you completed, you were protecting someone's father, someone's son." Jake's voice cracked. "You were protecting me even when I couldn't see it." He stood, brushing grass from his jeans. "I ride every Sunday now. The crew meets at sunrise and we visit facilities. Just checking in, just letting people know someone's watching. Someone cares." He smiled. "Last week a nurse saw our vests and started crying. Said her grandfather was a veteran and seeing us made her remember why she became a nurse, to honor people like him. Like you." Jake mounted his bike, Harold's old army jacket worn over his vest, now a permanent addition. "That's what you taught me, Dad. That honor isn't just in the fighting, it's in the remembering, in making sure sacrifice means something." He started the engine, letting it rumble, a sound that would forever remind him of the day 25 bikers arrived and changed everything. "The ride continues," Jake said, echoing his father's letter. "For you, for Mom, for every veteran who can't fight for themselves anymore." He rode toward the highway where the rest of Harold's army waited. They had a facility to visit in the next county, reports of neglect, a family too scared to act alone. But they wouldn't be alone. Not anymore. As the sun climbed higher, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because the fighting was over. It would never be over. But because he finally understood what his father had known all along. Some battles are worth a lifetime. Some legacies are written not in medals, but in the lives you change. Some fathers and sons find their way back to each other. Not in the years they have, but in the purpose they share. The throttle roared beneath Jake's hand. Behind him, 200 motorcycles answered. A thunder of chrome and loyalty, of honor remembered and promises kept. And somewhere, in a place beyond medals and regret, Harold Hawk Miller smiled. His son had finally come home, not to a place but to a purpose. The best homecoming of all?